Good evening and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre, LaRouche independent candidate for U.S. Senate in 2024, and today is Friday, November 17th, 2023. We are in an unbelievable situation which many of us perhaps could not imagine would have come to this. But what it appears over and over again is that the depravity of the current U.S. administration, but I have to say previous administrations, has no bottom and no limits. And we have a particularly difficult situation right now because the United States is a democratic republic with a strong presidential system by design. So therefore, who is the President of the United States is a matter of great import, not just for the United States, but for the world. And we have currently a president who is senile, and when he's not senile, he is nasty and criminal. And we have no presidential candidates who are truly peace candidates. People had been hopeful that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who kept referencing his assassinated uncle, President John F. Kennedy, and his father, Robert Kennedy, would actually follow in their footsteps. But when it came to the question of Israel, he can no longer be called a peace candidate. He has been silent on genocide, which is being perpetrated with the complicity and funding of the United States. And of course, but I'll just say it, this is not to condone the Hamas attack of October 7th, but I have to go back to what Lyndon LaRouche said about the September 11th, 2001 attacks, where he warned that the news media was stampeding the American people into the mentality of a guy who comes home, discovers his house has been burglarized, pulls out a shotgun, and shoots the cat of the next door neighbor. And when the wife says, "But honey, that's just the neighbor's cat," the guy says, "Get out of my way or I'll shoot you too." LaRouche warned that no one outside of the United States had the power to do what occurred in the United States on September 11th. And he said, if you don't look inwardly at who in the United States could have done this, military, intelligence, otherwise, it doesn't mean there weren't outside intelligence agencies participating, doesn't mean there weren't 14 people from Saudi Arabia who were involved in hijacking the airplanes, but no one from outside the United States could have taken down our security in that way without collusion or orchestration from within. And LaRouche said, if you go all over the world destroying people in poor nations who could not have done this to us, then you are leaving intact that apparatus and it will be there ready to strike again. I would say that a similar investigation has to be done into what was behind the Hamas attack on October 7th, because you have to ask a few questions. How is it that Israel, with supposedly the best intelligence in the world, could have been so unprepared? Why did it take so long to respond? Wasn't it a nice convenience for Bibi Netanyahu, who funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to the Hamas from 2012 to 2018 at least, and who was probably on his way to jail with tens of thousands of protesters against him for trying to reorganize the judiciary system to stay out of jail. So it's very convenient for him, as well as being convenient for Joe Biden, because he has tied himself to a victory in Ukraine against Russia, which is not happening. Ukraine is finished. The world is not going to supply Zelensky with more weapons. There's very fierce fighting right now. So you see in the press that Russians are taking heavy losses. They are. I heard Scott Ritter yesterday speaking about the period at the end of World War II when he said Hitler was finished. But because it was the end, people were particularly desperate. And he said that the highest number of American casualties occurred in April and May of 1945. So if you think about the ferocity of the fighting right now in Ukraine, it is because it's over. So that is something that Joe Biden would like everybody to forget. So we now have another war in an area which is extremely heated because there are religious connections for various people. But I will say that contrary to the stupid narrative in the news media, the overwhelming majority of the American people and the overwhelming majority of people in the world do not think that it is legitimate to kill tens of thousands of children and innocent people, supposedly in retaliation for a terrorist attack. And most people do not believe that this is going to make Israel safer if that's what you're concerned about. And in fact, the disgusting New York Post, which has been playing a despicable role these days, where they cover every single demonstration against the I saw an article today which literally began, demented protesters who are calling, they literally use that word, for the annihilation of Israel, occupied something or other, completely ignoring that one of the most vocal groups doing brilliant work is Jewish Voice for Peace at the moment. So at any rate, the New York Post covered a congressman calling for TikTok to be banned. Why? Because TikTok is promoting racism and anti-Semitism. How so? If you search the #1 item in support of Palestine, it has 3 billion views. If you search the #1 item in support of Israel, it has 200 million views. But I think that is reflective of the sentiment of the world. Now, the latest atrocity committed by the IDF is the raid on Al-Shifa Hospital, and earlier today I was at a die-in in front of Schumer and Gillibrand's offices in Manhattan. This is a large hospital, I think the largest in Gaza. It had 1,500 patients, 1,500 medical staff. I've heard different figures of between 20 and 40,000 civilians trying to seek refuge there. As people know, Israel has cut off water, electricity, etc., was already making things extremely difficult for the hospital staff. I learned and then the IDF invaded, and people say, oh, well, they gave warning. What are you supposed to do with newborn infants who are on oxygen and have all kinds of tubes going into that? Where are you going to move them to? You can't. I heard today at the rally that every single patient in the intensive care unit died during this, and they also named probably 100 or more doctors who have been killed in this. So people are right to be anguished. The question is, well, there are two questions. One, obviously we need an immediate ceasefire. Obviously the American people should ensure that any congressman who is not supporting a ceasefire should not be reelected. We have to hold our politicians to a higher standard. I also would like to say for everybody here and everybody listening, the fact that we do not have a qualified candidate for the presidency of the United States right now makes my campaign for U.S. Senate in New York much more important. We have to use this campaign to change the direction of the United States, and we have to build a movement that shapes the United States. And unlike the other candidates, since I worked with Lyndon LaRouche and now his wife Helga Zepp LaRouche for 35 years, I can assure you that I am not going to sell out, so people don't have to worry about that. But suppose we do get a ceasefire, then what? And that question everyone should be thinking of, because the driver of the current situation is the blowout of the transatlantic financial system. It is the end of the British Empire. So that means that everything that has held power, everything that you think has made it impossible for you to do this or that, is going to disintegrate, like when the Berlin Wall came down. And the question is, in that case, then what do you demand? You just say no ceasefire? How do you reorganize the world into a new system that allows the economic development of every single nation on the planet, that respects the sovereignty of every nation on the planet and recognizes the right, as it says in our Declaration of Independence, of every single child born on this planet to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? What are the principles of organizing that? And you see a reflection of that in the process with the BRICS nations, and now BRICS Plus, the Belt and Road Initiative. And this was the founding identity of the United States. We had the first anti-colonial revolution when we defeated the British Empire. And the world was we discussed this in the Schiller celebration last week, the world was overjoyed to see the British Empire defeated. And then the world was horribly disappointed when the French were unable to replicate it and drowned in a bloodbath of a bunch of enraged, lunatics who chopped off the heads of all the intellectuals, organized by the bankers, of course. So there was a question, why was the American Revolution successful? Why was the French Revolution a failure? How do we ensure that as this system collapses, we don't fall into a French Revolution, of which Schiller said, a great moment has found a little people. A great moment has found a population which is not prepared to accept the mantle of leadership that has fallen to them. And for that reason, we have to do a great deal of work on the American Revolution, the history of how the United States built its industrial powerhouse economy from being totally indebted at the end of the Revolution. What's the relationship between internal improvements, the thing the Confederacy hated, building railroads, building canals, building power grids, water management, all of these things that allow you can say freedom, but freedom has no meaning if you are starving to death, if you don't have clean drinking water, if your children can't be educated, if life expectancy is 35 years of age. Well, you might have freedom, whatever that means, but not really, you're not free. So for that reason, what I wanted to take up tonight is what just happened in Kabul, Afghanistan. I also think this is very useful because if you think about what kind of reconstruction is going to be needed when we finally have a Palestinian state, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, it shouldn't take a century to build a modern economy. And if you look at the pace at which China is building things in various parts of the world, you can see that that is not necessary. We also might reflect on why we are not taking certain measures in the United States, why we have people drowning in floods, why we have 3 train derailments a day, that perhaps we should think about things a little differently here. So Jason Ross, my guest, just recently actually was a speaker at an amazing conference in Kabul, Afghanistan, which has been under 40 years of war, a project named after the great, I don't know what to call him, physician, philosopher, Ibn Sina from the 890-ish, 800s AD. And I think I'll let Jason just tell you about what happened at this conference, and I think you might find it quite interesting because it allows you to see how people who have been under really horrific conditions for a very long time nonetheless are not pessimistic and are committed to rebuilding their nation. So Jason, please go ahead.
Thanks. So this event in Kabul was really fantastic, and I feel very honored and appreciative that I was able to go to it as part of the Schiller Institute delegation. About 600 people gathered at a major hotel to talk through what the future of the country will be, what kind of development projects are needed for the future, how to move forward on topics like education, labor and industry, credit, healthcare, and other energy, transportation, agriculture, water. We had workshops on all of these different subjects during the conference. People got together in smaller groups, put together ideas about how to make progress and goals for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years further down in the future, and then got back together to report back on what the different experts had to say. And this is going to then become, as we're working on it, a fuller report to be able to present to the government. So just a bit about Afghanistan, because this is a country that, given its location and its history, it has been used as a flashpoint in British geopolitics as a way of creating chaos, of deliberately causing chaos all around the region that's referred to by British geopoliticians as the heartland, as the center of the world island. So for 40 years now, Afghanistan has been in a state of warfare. First, the Soviet invasion. This killed 2 million people out of a population of 12 million, so huge. And then 20 years of US, NATO occupation. And now finally, 40 years later, Afghanistan is independent, it's sovereign, and it has the ability to really chart a course for its future. So this area that had been a center of conflict, a crossroads of a clash of civilizations, can instead, and should be, a crossroads of connectivity. So let's talk about Afghanistan's neighbors. So here there's a lot of countries that maybe we're not that familiar with, right? So we got Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan on the north. People from these countries were part of the Soviet Union that invaded. And so there's a bit of recognition of that their neighbors in the north didn't treat them so well at that time. We got Iran to the west. We got Pakistan in the southeast. Pakistan has now, frankly, cruelly declared that the over 1 million Afghans living there illegally have to go. This includes refugees, people fleeing the warfare, and so forth. So there's some conflict there with that. And then look at that tiny border in the northeast. China has a border of about 30 miles with Afghanistan. And it passes through a region that's extremely underdeveloped. This whole area has about 12,000 people living in it. There's like a dirt path that goes to China. There's no real trade, official trade that goes across that. But there are plans moving forward now to build a real serious roadway so that Afghanistan can have direct connection with China and vice versa. So a bit more about the current status in Afghanistan. There are 40 million people living in the country. This is up a lot compared to 30 years ago. The population's really been growing. It is not food self-sufficient. It has extremely high levels of poverty. The GDP per capita is under $400. That's not PPP, that's normal GDP. And the new government, the Taliban-run government, is not recognized by any country on the earth. So there's no country that has recognized the legitimacy of the current government. Going along with that, the central bank's reserves, the $9 billion of the Afghanistan central bank, have almost entirely been frozen on orders of the US or European countries, so they don't have access to this money. That makes it very hard to do trade with other countries. Plus, there's sanctions. Officially, the country isn't sanctioned, only some of the leaders, but the effect is that foreign businesses, they really are very nervous about getting involved at all. So it's very bad for their ability to trade. Because they're kicked out of the international financial system, they can't do electronic payments. So you can't process, a credit card in Afghanistan. You can't do an electronic payment with your neighboring country. So it makes just everything extremely difficult. This really hurts people, and it's not necessary. One major success that we're going to come to later of the current government is that it has made the country much safer. Terrorism, attacks like that, way down. Corruption, way down. I spoke to many people who said that they felt so much safer now and that they could actually go visit friends in other parts of the country. It used to be that, they would say that in the evening, you just stay at home. You wouldn't even go out on the street at night because you might be kidnapped and held for ransom. You might be just, robbed and so on. And now people said that they would drive at night to visit a friend in another province, go for a 3-hour drive at night, and not even once along the way have a roadblock, an extortion, or anything like that. So that's a huge plus. The other enormous success that they've had is in destroying opium production. The Taliban is not a fan of opium, and they've cut the poppy production by more than 95%. So extremely successful, and something really good for the entire world. I mean, heroin's not good for you. So I guess that's an understatement, all right. So this was another shot of the conference. So I think we were all kind of astonished to see how many people showed up, because this was absolutely huge. There were over 100 women present, which was also kind of a big thing. It was unusual to have a government-related-ish conference that had so many women attend and speak. So big deal. You're kind of getting my trip photos here, but so this is the Ibn Sina Research and Development Center that Diane had mentioned, which sponsored this event. So this is a group of Afghanis, emigres mostly, people living outside of the country now, but who care very much about their nation. And so for over a year now, there's been work with the Schiller Institute in collaboration to put together a proposal for what could the future be. We've been having Zoom calls with people from the different ministries, water people, energy people, agriculture people, going into the conference to try to have a lot of specifics about what we'd be able to accomplish. So here's Richard Freeman, who headed up the energy workshop, Bob Baker, Marcia Mary Baker, who were agriculture experts and played a big role there. Okay. Not everybody was on time. You can see it's a little empty there. So the conference was really well covered, actually. There were tons of media there for the opening sessions, which were addressed by top government leaders. Like the deputy foreign minister was there. And he spoke about the self-sufficiency of Afghanistan, about how it's time to stand on its own feet, encouraging people from the diaspora to return, saying there's a general amnesty. You worked for the NATO government, you worked for the Americans, fine, come back. You have a home here. We're not going to hold it against you. Bring your expertise. Let's develop and grow. And what many of these government leaders said was that the government wholeheartedly supports the work of the Ibn Sina Research Center. So this has got support at the highest level. Here's an example of one of the workshops. So the first day we had a plenary. We were all in that big hall. The second day we split up into workshops. This is part of the view of the education workshop. There were plenty of people back here. Almost 100 people showed up. For reasons you might imagine, the subject of education was rather controversial, so there were a lot of people from Afghanistan who wanted to share their views on that, including quite a number of women. If you're not aware, the higher education for women has essentially been ended. And there are many people that are not happy about that, needless to say. So they talked about it, among other things, at this. So the workshops, energy, mining, cultural heritage, water, hydropower, agriculture, health, industry and labor, industrializing, public credit, how to finance all these things. These are the groups that broke out. I'll just mention one group that I got to meet there. So these two women are leaders of a group called Stay in Afghanistan. And they're committed to stopping the brain drain, that educated Afghan people emigrate, many of them do. They're trying to urge development within the country. They're building up vocational training programs in partnership with factories and vocational education centers in Germany. They're saying we need to bring this in because among the most important skills that young people need is in industry, specifically electrical engineers and electrical workers. They said this is one of the biggest things that Afghanistan needs because the power supply is so far below what it needs to be, and there need to be workers to help build the new electrical systems. So they're working on getting the training to do exactly that. It's incredibly impressive. So I'd like to go through a few of the future-oriented projects of what can we do in what can be done in Afghanistan. So this is the northern part of the country. Here's the three neighboring stands, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. The border here is the Amudarya River. And Afghanistan, the new Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, has begun building a very large canal that will be able to bring under cultivation much more land. This is a very arid area. It's dry. You need irrigation or systems like this to be able to do farming. And then with this, Afghanistan stands poised to become agriculturally self-sufficient within 5 years, to be able to produce all the food that it needs, or enough food to eat domestically. This is a picture of some of the construction work that's being done. They are just going all in on this. They're putting enormous levels of effort and manpower into this. Here's a view of the part of the completed portion of the canal. It's about 1/3 done, so they are doing that. And this is without any real foreign help because you can't get involved, right? Aid organizations, UN, if it would involve collaborating or coordinating with the central government, with the evil Taliban, as they see it, you can't do it. So this has even included things like UNESCO, which is focused on cultural work and this sort of thing. They've pulled out of Afghanistan because they say, oh, that Taliban is so bad that we can't talk to archaeologists in Afghanistan anymore. It's totally nuts. Let's talk about transportation for a minute. So here's Afghanistan. The Trans-Afghan Railway this is something that's moving forward with just very recently a deal signed with Uzbekistan. Tashkent is up here in Kazakhstan to come through to be able to connect Afghanistan in a much better way with its neighbors to the north. And then also by building this and upgrading this rail to be able to connect into Iran and the broader world over towards Europe. There's also on the eastern side sorry, this is kind of poor quality, to build rail and a connection to Peshawar and into Pakistan. So this is the kind of connectivity that once it's there, you're going to completely transform the value of all of this land. I mean, think about it. If you're able to, whatever you're maybe doing in this area, now you've got the ability to ship whatever your product is to Tehran. You'll be able to bring it, this doesn't show the, this side, but you'll be able to get it down to Kabul. You'll be able to go up to Central Asia with it. Totally transforms the area. Let's talk about China. This is so we're looking at this part of Afghanistan and this finger here, this Wakhan corridor. This picture comes from a nature conservation group that opposes doing anything there, naturally. But work is already underway on improving the essentially non-existent road there through the incredibly mountainous terrain to be able to, to have something that really works. Just to show, yeah, it's extremely steep. I mean, it's amazing, the kind of mountains and how arid the area is. This is not the Wakhan corridor in particular, but this is in Afghanistan. Another topic, cultural heritage. There is an ancient city about 1800 years old called Mes Aynak. And the buildings, the artwork, and so forth in this area comes from when there was a extremely huge Buddhist influence in Afghanistan. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of archaeological riches there. There's also a lot of copper there, which is partly why this city was there in the first place, from the Bronze Age. So the conflict then between maintaining this cultural heritage while also wanting to develop and get at the copper and grow has basically been resolved. The Chinese company that has been involved in getting mining contracts there has agreed to do all underground mining. They're not going to do the open pit they had initially planned on. So, as an example of a success, Afghanistan will be able to keep its historical record there and also develop its mineral resources. Okay, last, I think, topic here is poppy cultivation. 2022, 2023. This is Helmand. This is one of the provinces of Afghanistan. This is in the southwest part of the country. So 2022, you can see all the pink everywhere. Pink is poppy. Over 50% of this land in the province that was under agricultural cultivation was poppy. And look at 2023. Instead, I don't know if you can see these, but it's almost entirely wheat. So what made that possible was, for one thing, getting rid of the drug pushers. Like this is a U.S. service member greeting a child in a poppy field. The U.S. government publishes this to say, look how good friends we are. And then they even, it's kind of crazy. Like, I don't know if you ever listened to BBC, but they have just the worst takes on everything. So they were complaining about Afghanistan. And they were saying, well, if the Americans and NATO pull out of Afghanistan, what's going to happen to all those shop owners that are selling them Coke? I was like, okay. I couldn't have made that up, but the BBC actually ran it. And then about opium, they say, well, yes, of course, heroin's not good and all, and of course, we're very anti-drugs here in, the British Empire. But what about all those poor farmers? They're not going to have any money if you get rid of their opium. Maybe they should keep doing it so they can make money while people become addicts and die on heroin, right? So one of the speakers at the conference was Pino Arlacchi. This is Pino Arlacchi. He's an Italian. Here's Fatah Raufi, one of the directors of the Ibn Sina research group, translating for him for the audience. Pino Arlacchi is a former undersecretary of the UN. He was the head of the UN Office on Drug Control. He was in Afghanistan decades ago as part of efforts to destroy the opium production. But after 9/11, after the invasion of Afghanistan, after the US and NATO coming in, the opium production shot back up, and he felt like he went back in 2010 as a representative of the EU, and he just felt like it was hopeless trying to stop it at that time. But now, he says, the fact that the government has been able to wipe this out is something that, here he is speaking with some of the government leaders, including Taliban members. This is a top businessman who helped make the conference a reality. This is Dawud Azimi, who is also part of the Ibn Sina research group. But anyway, Pino Arlacchi, his point to the audience when he spoke was that Afghanistan should be proud of what it has done for the world in two areas in particular. And it should tell the world, you should be thankful to us, and you should recognize us, okay? The two areas, one, the drug eradication. Hundreds of thousands of addicts in Afghanistan. Most of the opium in Europe is coming from Afghanistan. So he said Europe should be saying, thank you, this is wonderful. This is something good for human rights and so forth. Yeah. The second thing he says is cleaning up terrorism and ISIS and so forth. So he said the world should be thankful, this country should be recognized. So to finish with that, the central bank funds need to be released. This is a decision that the US government and also the European Union is holding up. And it's not even that much money. $9 billion. The Congress votes for another $9 billion in weapons like every week now. This is nothing. Why take this tiny amount of money from like one of the poorest countries on earth? It's just spiteful and nasty. It's nasty. Yeah. So give that back and then just recognize the government. Obviously, there's things about the Taliban that aren't great, but they're running the country, they're the government, and saying, oh, we're not going to officially recognize you or talk to you is having enormous harms on everyday people in Afghanistan, and it should be dropped. So those are a couple of specific things that the United States, for example, could easily do. Release the funds, recognize the government, and then it will be possible to collaborate. US engineering firms could get involved in planning things out, and so on. So the position of Afghanistan with respect to the future depends entirely on the paradigm that's prevailing in the world. The old geopolitical paradigm, Afghanistan was a zone of conflict. In the new paradigm of development that's now coming into being, it's a great opportunity for connectivity and growth. And if we make that paradigm the prevailing one in the world by changing the US to stop opposing it and be part of it, then Afghanistan and we can have a really bright future.
Great, thanks. Okay, I think since I'm sort of hidden, we should stand up for the discussion. Okay. So if we can be seen. I would like to take questions from here. I just want to say one thing that I forgot to bring up, but when you talked about the Taliban and how people don't want to recognize them because of their problems, I was thinking about, we do have to consider how Biden looks to the world. And I think the reports from the meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping are actually a bit over-rosy, over-optimistic. I mean, the whole world knows. One, I mean, you can go back a few administrations. We killed 1 million people in Iraq. We sent weapons to Ukraine to the death of at least 500,000 Ukrainians and tens of thousands of Russians, and that war is still going on. We're presiding over this horrific slaughter in Gaza, and Biden, at a press conference, gave full-throated endorsement to the attack on the hospital, saying that was legitimate. So how do you think Biden, if you're a head of state and you're coming to meet with Biden, or you're at this is not, Xi Jinping is a wise enough leader who is a Confucian scholar in a place with 5,000 years of history that he is not going there thinking, oh, I'm so glad I'm going to try and get some agreements with this person. But really, I think the idea of these leaders is they're just trying to perhaps handle Biden, trying to buy a little bit of time until maybe things change in the United States. A change with the elections doesn't look that hopeful. I mean, you could say on the one hand almost anything is better than Biden, but I thought anything might be better than George Bush, and then we got Obama. And so, you know, you have to be careful what you wish for. So a change in the elections, but I think really a change in the American people.
Yeah.
And I think the world is wondering what's wrong with us. We're not all in prison. We still do have freedom of speech in spite of the fact that they're trying to shut it down at every campus, including endorsed by Bobby Kennedy, censorship. But we still can actually go out and do a lot and make our voices heard. And the congressmen have to feel it. And I think everyone here knows that over 100 staffers walked out from their congressional offices. And apparently we learned when Tim Rush had a delegation on Capitol Hill the other day that many staffers have quit. People are quitting all over the place. And the staffers are saying, we are getting thousands of phone calls from your voters saying, ceasefire, stop the killing, stop the slaughter. And the congressmen are not responding in the right direction. At any rate, I just wanted to say that because we can say how much we think the Taliban is horrible and has these problems, but if we think about what our government looks like to anyone in the world, by our standards, the entire planet should have put sanctions on us. Yeah. I mean, they want a wall built around the United States to keep anyone from leaving and infecting the rest of the planet with our perverse behavior, at any rate. So that's all I wanted to say, but do you have any thoughts?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, you know, what is the... Elections are kind of a crazy time because unless there's somebody who's really worth voting for president, like Lyndon LaRouche, okay,
right.
Then there's something to do. Franklin Roosevelt. But, you know, with the current crop that we've got right now, it's pretty slim pickings. It's pretty depressing. And so it just raises the issue of, besides the election, I mean, what are the American people actually demanding and calling for and doing every single day besides the one day a year, the one day every 4 years you get to vote for president, or the 1 month every 4 years you get to vote for a president.
Well, that's how long they count your votes for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we should open it up. People have questions here. And I guess we'll have to repeat them. Can you hear, Dave, if someone speaks in the room? Probably? Oh, okay, Jane?
Wait, speak up.
Loudly.
Okay. The LaRouche and Schiller people and you, in your campaign, we all support economic development. However, what motivated me to get here tonight is that this Afghanistan's current efforts and actual congregation of people in a huge conference room and all of these lectures and so on, something is actually happening. That is amazing. It is not in the future. We are living often in the future and hope that something will get better. I mean, we can point to the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, but it is so thrilling that you, Jason, and the others, and Schiller, LaRouche representatives were at this conference. Were you invited?
Were we? Yeah. Well, this Sina research group invited us to participate.
More about them?
Yeah. So it's essentially run by three emigre Afghans who live in Europe now, but also have broad networks and connections inside Afghanistan, of course. So for over a year now, they've been working on, okay, hey, the country's sovereign now, the NATO's gone, okay, new situation here. So really, ever since then, the idea has been, well, this is an opportunity to put into place put into place something new. And the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche Movement, we've got plans for, everywhere, right? So it was sort of a natural, I don't want to say some of the private things, but it's sort of natural that people, Afghan patriots looking for how to develop their country, would end up collaborating with us to put forward plans. So there was already a year ago a 90-page proposal that covered hydropower, coal power plants, mining, industry, a lot of these topics already a year ago. And that was part of the discussion process for them getting this conference to occur and for getting the incredibly high-level government participation. So the fact that there were numerous Taliban members from the government, deputy minister of this, deputy minister of that, in agriculture and foreign ministry and finance, that they came and said the government supports this initiative, I think is fantastic for our proposals in collaboration with these, this research group to become government policy. So it's very exciting.
And I just want a sort of a corollary question. Sometimes corporations or entities, enterprises that come in to invest in a country, they have a lot of money, we're not bringing in money, we're bringing in ideas, we're bringing in economic development that would conserve the people, the sovereign government, but the people. So there's a difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a conceptual overview here. And clearly part of the work is to work with specific companies. So like that Chinese mining company that agreed to switch and say, okay, we'll do all underground mining here to protect the historical heritage of the area. That's an example of putting pressure with them, working with them. So, but really there's a big political thing, which is this issue of recognition. That will make it much easier for other businesses, other companies to get involved, because they just think it's so risky right now. You get involved, and then what happens? If there's a problem, your government doesn't even recognize this government. How could you resolve the situation, So it's a sticking point.
Jamie, did you have a question?
Yeah, you want to go ahead first?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
Loud.
Yeah, did you learn what was discussed in the monetary and central bank working group discussions?
No, because the reports, okay, so the third day of the conference, the translation wasn't the first day we had headsets, it was great. The third day, it wasn't as great. And the report back from that group was in Pashto. And we're basically relying on our Afghan friends to compile that and send us back. But I do know that going into the discussion, both Paul Gallagher and Dennis Small had prepared, they weren't able to go in person, but they'd prepared video presentations. So those were played. Helga Zepp-LaRouche prepared a video presentation, and that was partially played and will be in the final report. Oops. I think that actually, yeah, hopefully that answers the question. I just kind of rambled. Okay.
Marcel?
So, well, first of all, congratulations on the wonderful endeavor that you and others were a part of. One thing you had mentioned in your presentation that was surprising to me was that not a single government, as was reflected by others, has recognized the Taliban in the leadership role of Afghanistan. In fact, obviously the case being that they are. And that initially surprised me because I'm thinking that countries like China, who has emerged as a grand peacemaker in that area, taking a rightful moral authority in that respect, outside of their own borders, would understand what has been done. As a matter of fact, I think they even in certain ways remonstrated against the theft of these billions of dollars from the Afghan government.
Yes.
As has Russia.
Yes.
And other countries who've endured, this particular fate. And I'm thinking of countries like Cuba, countries like Venezuela, and a lot of other Southwest Asian countries. So it was a little puzzling to me. I mean, my first question is, would you say that it's simply, even at this late stage, among BRICS members, countries that aspire to a just financial system and are looking forward to working with, if not out and out joining the BRICS, is it still a question of fear? Are there enough maybe simmering geopolitical issues that have not been reconciled yet in these countries that account for the fact that not a single country has stepped forward to say, we want to make investments in this area, this is a crucial crossroads, and so we will recognize you in exchange for allowing us to assist you in doing this and this and that for the benefit of Afghanistan, for the benefit of the continent, for the benefit of the world. That's the first part of my question I would ask. And secondarily, do you feel that this conference that was in large part shaped by Helga and the Schiller Institute in terms of the thinking, and also in terms of these nations that, you know, China, Russia, and so forth, who have been influenced and know the power of the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute globally, and also, I think, understand that they see very clearly that the Schiller Institute and LaRouche Organization is modeling, is really molding this development plan around Afghanistan and other areas. Do you see that this conference is a large step towards having the Taliban, in a certain sense, legitimized, recognized? In other words, the first countries having the courage to come out and say, there's development to be had, there's work to be done, we can do this, we recognize you as the governors of this country.
Well, this conference was definitely a big deal. One of the common things that the organizers heard from attendees was, you have given us hope. Because this was really the first, okay, this conference, this wasn't sponsored by any foreigners. All the funding was Afghan. Afghan people paid for the event and did things and, you know, so forth. They made it all happen. This was a sovereign Afghan event. And that so many people came, you know, and from around the country, so many people came, I think reflects how extremely important this was as an opportunity to say, let's discuss together our future. So I hope it will be a big step forward towards recognition. I mean, Pino Arlacchi, so just, you know, there's cultural differences, right? So one thing was that there was not a whole lot of clapping. So people would give speeches, people would just listen to the next speech. After Pino Arlacchi gave his speech, there was a lot of applause because, you know, because he had said.
That's because he's Italian and they're expressing. No, I'm just kidding.
It rubbed off,
Right.
Well, because he's a top guy. Remember, so a top official at the UN, when he went back to Afghanistan in 2010 representing the European Union, he did that as a member of the European Parliament. So he was basically the MEP in charge of EU-Afghanistan relations. This is a top guy, and for him to say, you need to tell everybody why you deserve recognition because you've stopped heroin and you've stopped terrorism and the world should be grateful. That's a pretty big deal. They were really appreciative of someone of his stature coming to the country and making that kind of statement. As far as steps towards recognition otherwise go, China has been the first country to appoint a new ambassador. So when you send an ambassador to a country, they come with their credentials, and you go to the seat of government and you present your credentials. Other countries, to avoid having to go present credentials to the Taliban, have either maintained their ambassadors, they just haven't changed, or they just don't appoint ambassadors. They appoint only assistants. So they say, oh, we only have a chargé d'affaires, and that's it, and that way you can avoid that. So China did make that step, which is sort of in that direction. I think other countries I had heard were going to do that too. Part of the issue with it, and this is from talking with diplomats from other countries, that I was wondering the same thing, like, come on, why don't you recognize them already? And it's not just that they don't like the Taliban's policies about women, for example. It's that they're hopeful that a more representative process of creating the central government would have better buy-in or stability countrywide. The Taliban doesn't have full control over the whole country at present, mostly, but not entirely. And so I think that that's also part of it. But I mean, well, I guess I've said my view. Just, recognize the government. They're running the country. So,
Thank you, Jason.
sure.
Madeline?
Jason, you just said in response to Jane that the Schiller Institute has development projects all over the place. I assume they're not arbitrary and are not disconnected. Maybe you or Diane could go a little bit into Lyndon LaRouche's thinking, what he thought economics is and what purpose and how it actually happens. If there's principles or if it's just falling down from the sky.
Well, and briefly, economics starts from the difference between us and animals. And that means that we have to change our relationship to nature repeatedly. So the two biggest ways that that takes place are through science, through the development of new technologies, which then get used in industry and everywhere else, agriculture. And the second big way is in infrastructure, which physically transforms the environment that we live in. So a lot of the basics of the development, a lot of it starts from connectivity and energy. So transportation, power. Today, that means opposing the green ideology that basically prevents meaningful power development by saying, oh, that's not, don't build coal plants, Afghanistan. Stay poor. Instead of building a nice big coal plant, you should buy 2 windmills with the same amount of money. Right, so you got to get past that. And then water is the other major part of infrastructure. So I think between those things and then the understanding of physical economy and the need to produce what's required to advance that platform of infrastructure and further other industries is sort of the starting point on things. That's a brief idea.
There's a question actually that came, or a comment about reparations that just came in from my very dear friend Bernie Holland. And I actually want to take that up because it's related to this. I think on the one hand, there is a certain moral question. You could maybe say atonement. The United States occupied Afghanistan for 20 years, destroyed the place, blew up their infrastructure. Would it not be lawful that we would make an investment into the rebuilding of the country? I mean, not only are we not investing, we've stolen $9 billion from them, but, and yes, I suppose you could say that's reasonable, but then there's all kinds of ideas about different kinds of reparations, and I actually think better than reparations is to think about the Treaty of Westphalia and the question of the advancement of mankind as a whole. Because really, you don't, as Lyndon LaRouche used to say about the civil rights movement, he said, well, yeah, you want to have equal rights? All right, we'll all be equal, we'll all get on the train, and the train is not going anywhere because you shut down the whole economy, and you're going to be equally impoverished, and, so. And also, I have to say, enormous damage is done to people who oppress other people. When you oppress other people, you are spiritually destroyed. People who engage in torture are harmed. People who engage in killing other people are deeply harmed themselves. So the question is, how do you address that? And this question, the Treaty of Westphalia, is so important because if you're going to say no retribution, it doesn't mean you're not admitting that horrific wrongs were committed and people committed enormous acts of evil against each other, but you say, okay, we are now going to move forward together to improve, and in this case, the question of the benefit of the other. We are going to act for the benefit of the other. I'm going to act in your interest, which helps the other person, but also makes the person doing it a much better person. And I think we tend to be very linear in our thinking, like what's the logic, these supposed legitimization, which there is none, of the kind of genocide being carried out. Well, don't you think Israel should just take it? Don't you have to respond, right? If someone does something, must you not punish them? And of course, that's all wrong. It never leads to justice. Revenge is not justice. Retribution is not. What is justice? And that, I think, has to do with natural law and what you said. What is the nature of humanity? What is the nature of a human being? Do we not each have a right to become better people?
And that becoming, I mean, justice is in the future, right? Responses are
exactly.
always backward looking.
Exactly.
Like, this happened, don't we have to do something? Like, well, okay, but are you actually making yourself a better future? Are you thinking? I mean, when you brought up Lynn's article about shoot the neighbor's cat, I mean, that's perfect, because you say, hold on, how about getting to the bottom of the intelligence failure that allowed the attack to happen in October and like beefing up the wall? Like, how about just, would that work instead of destroying Gaza? I mean, you know, it's bizarre that it's treated, anyway, I don't need to.
Yeah, it's a whole dynamic. It's hideously ugly, and it denies humanity. Because you say, this idea of punishment is, don't you get, if you, like, and Trump said the most horrible thing, for every drop of blood that is they shed of ours, we will shed a gallon of theirs. Great, that's going to be wonderful. And that'll really make people be good, don't you think? I mean, I do everything I do because I'm afraid of what someone might do to me.
That's the best way to create a friendship with somebody, is know that if you're mean to them, they'll kill you, so therefore you're very good friends.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just on the U.S. role in Afghanistan as an example, it's not like it's a big mystery what the U.S. could be doing. I mean, some of the things that the U.S. did were appreciated by at least some people in Afghanistan. One of the big ones was the American University there. I talked to several students who had gone there, and they said they really liked it. You know, but that's of course not there anymore. So there's a lot of opportunities to do good if the wall that's preventing it from happening is removed.
Dick.
Picking up on your Westphalian principle, do the Afghanis remember the role of the British? For instance, Tony Blair in Chicago in 1999 called for ending the Westphalian system. And Zbigniew Brzezinski went to the same Fletcher School of Diplomacy that Henry Kissinger did. And he was the one who created the Arctic crisis that lured the Russian invasion of 1979. Are they aware of the role of the British in using the American brawn and British brains in messing everything up?
I can't answer that generally, but I can say just based on the people that I spoke to, because the topic of the British would come up. There are a few things that unite the world more than countries finding reasons to dislike the British. And this is one of those examples, too, where there were a number of people who recognized that. I mean, one of the men, for example, brought up the Treaty of Versailles. He said, look, this was supposed to end a war, but they put in place something that would absolutely cause the next one. You know, they set up the conflict. And I think they're pretty, some of them were pretty aware of how conflicts are created. And discussing the situation with India and Pakistan and the British withdrawal, also the discussion with what's happening in Israel and Palestine. So there were a lot of opportunities to talk about the British.
I have a question. I wonder, what is the potential or the availability of hydroelectric power in Afghanistan? Is it under development or not so?
There's a lot more hydropower than is actually used right now. So most of Afghanistan's electricity is imported. Tajikistan, like Kabul's electricity comes from a power line from Tajikistan, basically. So they just pay for it. What power production there is in Afghanistan, a lot of it is hydro, because there are some really fantastic hydro sources. You got all these mountains and everything. And the I don't have at the tip of my tongue the amount of additional hydropower, but it's enormous. It's at least 10 gigawatts, or if not more. So enough for tens of millions of people. Could be done through hydro.
Art.
We actually built a hydropower plant on one of the main rivers there
Yeah.
in the 50s, which is probably not even used anymore. I've seen we published pictures of it. I was going to make a point. Mike Billington recommended reading this book called The Great Game a while ago, which is about how the British and the Russians were fighting, and the battle was really centered on Afghanistan. So for 100 years they were waging these crazy conflicts and battles, and they were getting, both sides getting destroyed by it. So it's been a long process. I was going to bring up something else, which is in this question of recognition. On a cultural level, this was the Ibn Sina Foundation, right? And you mentioned China being a 5,000-year-old civilization. You could probably put a list of 100 things that China's contributed to civilization that we all benefit from, right? And Afghanistan probably has something similar to in terms of the history. But then, of course, Ibn Sina, he wasn't born in Afghanistan. His roots were in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you could say something about the contribution he represented in terms of medical science and philosophy.
Well, I think that what he contributed is also very important as a symbol of what the future could bring. So you bring up medicine, which is his most famous area. He's credited with having developed the idea of quarantining people to prevent the spread of disease, the importance of hygiene in preventing the spread of disease. I think it goes to the issue that Helga has raised many times of having a dialogue of cultures where you look at the best that has come from a certain culture as a basis for having dialogue about the even better things that are going to come in the future.
I think we will conclude the live stream part of this meeting. People who are here can stick around a little. For the people listening online, and everyone here too, April 16th is the beginning of petitioning to put me on the ballot in New York. It's 45,000 signatures in 6 weeks, valid signatures. Last time we turned in 66,000 signatures. I suspect it's going to be harder this time. We started getting really vicious harassment at the end when various nasty people figured out that we were going to succeed. And I am beginning to put together the team who is going to be working on that petitioning, which is April 16th through the end of May. And there's going to be a statewide meeting in the middle of the state in the Syracuse area, December 3rd, and also on Zoom. So for people in New York and U.S. citizen voters in other states outside New York, there's a lawsuit which my name is on, I'm very proud of that, which was one to allow out-of-state petitioners in New York. So please sign up at sarahforsenate.com with your information, and if you're interested in helping with the petitioning, also donations are urgently needed. I need to build up a war chest going into that period because it's not just the logistical expenses, and New York is insane between the tolls and the gas and everything else, but legal expenses. So that's what I would like to say to those of you who are joining us remotely. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and share the video. If you're a U.S. citizen or green card holder, please donate. And if we are all lucky, knock on wood, we'll see you again next week.